October 25th, 1415. 6,000 English soldiers stand knee-deep in mud, rain hammering down, dysentery tearing through the ranks. 200 miles from safety, and blocking their path, 20,000 French knights in the finest plate armor money can buy. This isn't a fight. This is a massacre waiting to happen. But by the time the sun sets, French nobility will be stacked in piles 3 bodies high, 6,000 of them. Dead, and Henry V will walk away with fewer than 400 casualties. How? What happens when terrain becomes a weapon? When disease-ridden archers shatter the flower of French chivalry? When a 28-year-old king turns a death march into legend? 1,000 men crammed into 300 ships. He's not raiding, he's claiming. The French throne sits on his family tree through his great-grandfather Edward III. But negotiations collapsed. The French offered Princess Catherine a dowry of 600,000 crowns enlarged Aquitaine. Henry wanted 2 million crowns. Normandy, Touraine, Anjou, Brittany, Flanders, Aquitaine, basically half of France. They said no. He said steal. If you value documented medieval battlefield history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual using sources from Anne Curry's Agincourt, a new history published by Cambridge University Press in 2005, and Juliet Barker's Agincourt, published by Little Brown in 2005, drawing from 7 contemporary eyewitness accounts including the Gesta Henrici Quinti, written by Henry's own chaplain who traveled with the baggage train, Jean Lefebvre de Saint-Remy, who watched the battle firsthand, and Enguerrand de Monstrelet's chronicles. These aren't generic sources. These are the men who stood on that field, who counted the bodies, who recorded the names of every duke and count who died face down in Norman mud. Now back to the information. The weapon that decides Agincourt took a lifetime to master. The English longbow, 6 feet tall minimum, sometimes 6 feet 6 inches based on Mary Rowe's archaeological finds from 1545. Crafted from yew wood. Italian or Spanish yew preferred, imported because English yew lacks the seasoning time. The bowyer selects a single stave. The outer sapwood faces away from the archer, handles tension when drawn. The inner heartwood faces the archer, absorbs compression. The process takes up to 4 years. Wood must season. Grain must be perfect. One flaw in the bow explodes under draw weight, sending splinters through the archer's hand. Modern compound bows max around 70 pounds. Longbowmen pull double, sometimes triple that force. The physical conditioning was extreme. Training began in childhood. English law under Edward III in 1363, the archery law, mandated archery practice on Sundays and holidays for all able-bodied men. Boys started at age 7 or 8 with lighter bows. By 20, they'd spent over a decade building muscle memory, strength, technique. By 30, they were masters. One archer buried at Towton shows left arm bones noticeably thicker and longer than his right. The longbow literally reshaped human anatomy. It wasn't a weapon you picked up. It was an identity forged bone deep over years. Points, needle-like tips designed to punch through mail and plate, or broadheads to wound horses and unarmored men. Arrow velocity, 150 to 170 feet per second at release. Effective killing range, 250 yards. Maximum range, 400 yards for a skilled archer. At 250 yards, a bodkin point penetrates wrought iron armor. High-quality steel plate stops arrows at long range, but not at close distance, never at joints, gaps, visors, eye slits. The sky darkens. Chronicles describe it repeatedly, arrows blotting the sun. In wet weather, crossbows become expensive clubs, longbows keep killing. Some are Welsh. Wales supplied thousands of longbowmen since Edward I conquered Wales in 1283 and integrated Welsh archery doctrine into English military structure. The Welsh developed tactical longbow deployment during the Anglo-Norman invasions. By 1415, English and Welsh archers are interchangeable. Same training, same weapon, same lethality. Longbowmen fight unarmored or in leather jerkins, maybe a gambeson, quilted padded jacket, for minimal protection. They need mobility. Plate armor slows movement. Archers must reposition, run, flank. At Agincourt, they're positioned in wedge formations on both flanks. This creates enfilade fire, arrows hitting from angles, targeting sides where armor is weaker, where horses have less protection. Each archer carries a 6-foot wooden stake sharpened at both ends. Before battle, they pound stakes into mud at 45-degree angles pointing at the enemy. This breaks cavalry charges. Horses impale themselves or veer away. Knights dismounting to advance on foot navigate stakes, slowing them, channeling them into kill zones where arrow density is highest. The tactic possibly came from Ottoman use at Nicopolis in 1396. Henry adapted it. The French haven't encountered English forces using stakes before. Flight time, 8 to 10 seconds at 300 yards. Impact sound like hail on slate, but the slate is steel and the rain is iron-tipped wood, traveling 170 feet per second. But 2 knights arrive, Raoul de Gaucourt and the Sieur de Stuteville, with 300 more men-at-arms. They dig in. Henry deploys 12 great guns. The siege grinds on. One day becomes 2, becomes 5, becomes 35. The walls crack. Mines collapse. Countermines flood. And then the real enemy arrives. 12,000 men and 20,000 horses crammed into siege camps. Human waste everywhere. The Lizard River, possibly dammed upstream, cutting fresh water flow. Flies breeding in the August heat. The bacteria spreads. Soldiers start bleeding from the gut. September 15th, Richard Courtenay, Bishop of Norwich, dies, a man so valuable to Henry as diplomat and advisor that he never even visited his own diocese. September 18th, Michael de la Pole, Earl of Suffolk, 54 years old, veteran of Edward III's Crusades, dead. The sick lists pile up. Anne Curry's research in the National Archives identifies 1,330 men invalided home, 36 confirmed dead during the siege. But those are just the records that survived. The Burgundian chronicler Enguerrand de Monstrelet records upwards of 2,000 English deaths from dysentery alone. Whole companies see 25% casualty rates. The Earl Marshal loses 61 men from 219, 28% of his force sick or dead. Winter approaches. The smart move? Sail home, but Henry doesn't sail. He decides to march his diseased, depleted force, roughly 9,000 men now, maybe 6,000, overland 200 miles to Calais through enemy territory. It's not strategy, it's a statement, a chevauchée, a show of strength that says, I own this land. At the Somme, French forces hold every ford. Henry swings inland, searching for a way across. Days pass, rations run low, men still dying from dysentery. Some soldiers, according to historian Juliet Barker, cut off their own soiled breeches and undergarments just to let nature take its course while marching. They're filthy, starving, sick, and the French army is growing. Charles d'Albret, Constable of France, born December 1368, and Jean Lemangre, called Boucicaut, the Marshal, assemble a force that swells from 9,000 to 12,000 to 20,000 as local nobles answer the Semence des Nobles, the feudal call to arms. The Dukes of Orléans, Bourbon, Alençon, Bar, Brabant, the Counts of Nevers, Vendôme, Richemont, Vaudémont, Marle, Fauconberg. The French master of crossbowmen, David de Rambouillet, with 3 sons, knights numbering in the thousands. This isn't just an army, it's the entire military and political leadership of a generation. The English halt. They're trapped. They can't retreat. They can't avoid battle. That night, the French camp, maybe a mile away. Some sources say they spent the evening dicing for ransoms they'd collect from captured English nobles, laughing, confident. The English? Henry orders absolute silence. Violated as a knight, lose your horse and armor. Violated as a common soldier, lose your right ear. They sleep in the mud, rain hammering down all night. And, after a week of rain, those furrows are flooded traps, the clay beneath turned to sucking mud. The French have the numbers. Modern scholars debate 12,000 to 36,000, but most settle on 20 to 25,000, with Anne Curry's archival work suggesting at minimum 12,000 even in conservative estimates. The English? Around 6,000, maybe 1,500 men-at-arms in plate armor. Maybe 7,000 longbowmen, probably closer to 5,000 after disease. Outnumbered at least 3 to 1, possibly 6 to 1. Break cavalry charges. This tactic, borrowed possibly from the Ottoman victory at Nicopolis in 1396, the English hadn't used at Crécy or Poitiers. It's new. The men-at-arms, maybe 900 to 1,500 depending on source, stand 4 ranks deep, shoulder to shoulder in the center. The vanguard, 4,800 men-at-arms under d'Albret and Boucicaut, with cavalry wings of 800 to 1,200 picked men under Clignet de Brabant and Louis de Beauredon positioned like horns. The main battle, 3,000 men-at-arms under the Dukes of Alençon and Bar, each line packed 16 ranks deep, 200 mounted men-at-arms assigned to attack the English rear. And critically, crossbowmen and French archers placed behind the lines unable to support. The French are so packed they can barely move. The narrow field means only a fraction can engage at once. Terrain has already neutered their advantage. Medieval military doctrine. Foot soldiers who march lose, those who stand and hold win. The French think time is on their side. They're blocking Henry's escape. Why rush? The archers replant their stakes. Henry raises his hand. Sir Thomas Erpingham throws his baton in the air, shouts, "Nestroke! Now strike!" and the arrows fly. Shafts for weight, bodkin points designed to punch through armor. The French front line takes the storm. Horses scream, men drop. The cavalry charge, meant to sweep the archers off the field, breaks before it reaches the stakes. Horses impale themselves, throw riders, wheel back into the advancing men-at-arms. Chaos. Clay, clinging to boots, greaves, sabatons, rain-soaked, churned by thousands of feet. The French lower their visors to protect their faces from arrows. The eye holes and air slits and bassinets are weak points. Vision restricted, breathing labored. They stagger forward through 300 yards of arrow shot, each volley felling more men. Those who drop can't rise, armor too heavy, mud too deep. Men behind trample forward, stepping on the fallen. The press becomes a crush. The second line plows into the back of the first, adding weight but no combat power. Men in the front ranks are squeezed forward by those behind, unable to retreat, unable to fight effectively. They suffocate in their armor. Contemporary accounts describe bodies stacked 3 deep. When they fall, they can't rise. The armor that protected them from arrows now imprisons them. Men drown in 3 inches of mud, face down, trapped by their own protection. Others are trampled. The press of bodies from behind crushes men in front. Visors are locked down to protect against arrows, restricting vision to narrow eye slits. Breathing is labored. One knight describes fighting through a terrifying hail of arrow shot before even reaching English lines, then entering the melee already exhausted, unable to see properly, gasping for air inside the helmet. They push forward anyway, adding pressure, creating the crush. Medieval military doctrine says those who stand win, but the French aren't standing, they're drowning in their own mass. Lightly armored, they're fast compared to encumbered knights. They target weak points, eye slits, gaps at joints, under raised arms, backs of knees. They pull knights down, cut throats, drown men in mud. Saint Remy, witnessing the prisoner executions later, describes victims cut in pieces, heads and faces, the only vulnerable areas on a fully armored knight. The battle rhythm, arrow storm, cavalry charge breaks, men-at-arms advance through mud and arrows, reach English line exhausted, fight and crush, second line arrives, adds to crush, archers join melee, French cohesion collapses. Duration, 2 to 3 hours of sustained combat, though some estimates run as short as half an hour for the main fighting. But the killing starts at 11 in the morning when arrows first fly. By early afternoon, it's over. 4 of his 5 brothers will die in the French wars, 1 at Jargeau 15 years later, 2 in captivity, 1 at Agincourt beside him. The de la Pole family pays in blood for Lancastrian loyalty. The knighthood dies with him. During this, an axe blow cracks Henry's helmet, knocks off a piece of the crown mounted atop it. That helmet, battle-damaged, later hangs over Henry's tomb in Westminster Abbey, the dent from Agincourt visible for 6 centuries. Then someone, accounts vary on who, strikes Alençon down mid-surrender. He dies without yielding. Chivalric combat has rules. This battle breaks them repeatedly. An archbishop, the Admiral of France, the Lord of Dampierre, the Master of Crossbowmen David de Rambourg, dead with all 3 sons, the Master of the Royal Household, Guichard Dauphin, the Prévôt of the Marshals. According to heralds, counting bodies afterward, 3,069 knights and squires killed, at least 2,600 more corpses found without coats of arms, 90 to 120 great lords and bannerets dead. Entire noble families wiped out in the male line. In some regions, a whole generation of landed nobility annihilated. The English have prisoners everywhere, hundreds of them, maybe 1,000 or more nobles taken for ransom. Henry's men are scattered across the field, exhausted, intermingled with French soldiers. The battle seems over. They loot the camp, precious items, a crown, silver, Henry's personal treasures. Second, remnants of the French 3rd Division, 600 men-at-arms under the Counts of Marle and Fauconberg, and the Lords of Louvroy and Dampierre, attempt a mounted counterattack. Monstrelet says it ends as disastrously as the earlier charges, but Henry doesn't know that yet. And he's got hundreds of armed prisoners scattered among his exhausted men. If those prisoners realize they outnumber their captors, if they pick up weapons from the field, if the French reserve attacks again, the English could lose everything. The prisoners could rearm, the English longbowmen can't shoot without hitting their own men, and the whole victory collapses into mutual slaughter. Not all. Spare the most prominent, the dukes like Orleans and Bourbon, the ones worth massive ransoms, 10,000 crowns or more, but everyone else, execute them. The English knights refuse. It violates chivalry. It's beneath their honor. Knights don't slaughter defenseless men who've surrendered. They won't do it. So Henry assigns the task to a squire commanding 200 archers, the men who've already killed thousands today. Adding a few hundred more doesn't burden their conscience the same way. Those get their throats cut once helmets are pried off. Others submit, kneel, accept death. Some are herded into structures, a house, a barn, and the building is set ablaze. One French knight's account describes around a dozen prisoners locked in a house, then burned alive. They scream until they don't. John Keegan, analyzing the battle in his military history, argues maybe 200 archers were assigned the task, and they killed relatively few before the French reserve fully broke and fled. at which point Henry rescinded the order. The killing lasted maybe 20 to 30 minutes, long enough for hundreds to die, short enough that the order could be stopped before wholesale slaughter. But the exact count vanishes into the chaos of the field. Medieval record-keeping doesn't track how many prisoners died versus how many were spared. It tracks ransoms paid. Dead men pay nothing. If the battle resumes, armed prisoners pose an existential threat, so they die. Practical, brutal, necessary. Only later historians call it a war crime. In 1415, it's Tuesday. Obligations, sealed in Calais between November 1415 and June 1417, those are just the ones with surviving paperwork, probably double that number, taken prisoner overall, most ransomed within a year or two. The truly valuable prisoners, Duke of Orléans, who becomes the poet Charles d'Orléans during 25 years of English captivity, and Marshal Boucicaut, are taken to England, held for years, ransomed for fortunes. When the slaughter ends, Henry sends envoys to the French. The field is his. He summons Montjoie, the French herald who'd been watching the battle alongside English heralds from a neutral position. Heralds from both sides traditionally observe battles together to record results for posterity, settle disputes, confirm who won. They settle on the name, Agincourt, after the nearest fortified place. The village gives the battle its name. In English mouths, it becomes Agincourt, the name that echoes through 6 centuries. 3 dukes, Alençon, Bar, Brabant, 9 counts, Blamont, Dreux, Fauconberg, Grandpré, Marle, Nevers, Roussy, Vaucourt, Vaudémont, 1 viscount, Puisaye, an archbishop, 90 to 120 great lords and bannerets, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, born December 1368, dead at 46, the Admiral of France, the Lord of Dampierre, the Master of Crossbowmen, David de Rambours, dead alongside all 3 of his sons, 4 generations of military service ended in 3 hours, the Master of the Royal Household, Guichard Dauphin, the Prévôt of the Marshals. According to heralds walking the field and recording heraldry on surcoats and shields, 3,069 knights and squires killed and identified. At least 2,600 more corpses found without coats of arms to identify them. Common soldiers, men-at-arms of low birth, mercenaries, anyone whose family couldn't afford heraldic display. Entire noble families wiped out in the male line. In some regions, Artois, Picardy, a whole generation of landed nobility ceased to exist between dawn and dusk on October 25th. The Gesta Henrici Quinti, written by the chaplain in Henry's household who traveled with the army, claims fewer casualties than other accounts, possibly inflated for propaganda purposes. Most reliable historians place English dead somewhere between 112 and 400 men. Juliet Barker's archival research identifies at least 112 Englishmen confirmed dead, including Edward of Norwich, 2nd Duke of York, and Michael de la Pole, 3rd Earl of Suffolk. Some sources push English casualties as high as 600, though this seems unlikely given the defensive position and tactical advantage. Even accepting 600 English dead against 6,000 French yields a ratio of 1 to 10, unprecedented, devastating, complete. Any wounded French left overnight in the open are killed. All nobility has already been taken away. Commoners, too, injured to move, are dispatched. It's practical, not cruel. No medical care available, they'd die anyway. The field is littered with bodies. 3 heaps of dead piled around the 3 main English standards. Mud mixed with blood, armor bent and broken, horses dead in the furrows. He arrives November 8th, delayed by wounded and sick men, by prisoners who must be guarded and transported. He sails for England November 16th. The crossing takes 1 day. Arrives Dover, November 17th. Reaches London, November 22nd. The city erupts. 20,000 citizens line streets, processions, pageantry. He's hailed as Lord of England, Flower of the World, Soldier of Christ. Songs are written. The Agincourt Carol, probably composed for his London reception, celebrates English might, divine favor, the impossible victory. The effect on national morale is electric. England hasn't had a victory like this in generations. Henry is 28 years old and has just cemented his place among the greatest warrior kings in English history. Despite the slaughter, despite decapitating French military leadership, England doesn't win the 100 Years' War here. Henry returns to France in February 1417. He takes Caen. He takes Normandy. He takes Rouen. The French King Charles VI, suffering from schizophrenia and psychotic episodes, sues for peace. The Treaty of Troyes, signed May 1420, recognizes Henry as regent and heir to the French throne. Henry marries Princess Catherine, Charles' daughter. He's won. It spreads through the siege camp just as it did 7 years earlier. Henry contracts it. He dies August 31st, 1422, at the Château de Vincennes. He's 34 or 35 years old. He never sees his son. Henry VI, born December of 1421, is 9 months old when his father dies. He becomes King of England, and 2 months later when Charles VI dies, King of France too, a baby king. A regency government, and the French resurgence begins. William Shakespeare writes Henry V. The play immortalizes Agincourt with the St. Crispin's Day speech, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother." Churchill uses the play to rally Britain in World War II. The battle becomes myth. The mud neutralized cavalry. The narrow field prevented the French from deploying their superior numbers. The English discipline held against overwhelming odds. Disease had already winnowed both armies. Henry's tactical positioning gave his men every advantage terrain could offer. The French command structure fell apart. Too many nobles all wanting glory, nobody with overall authority to enforce a battle plan. D'Albret and Boucicaut couldn't control the great lords. Everyone wanted frontline positions. Nobody wanted to wait. The cavalry charge happened too late, after arrows had already begun. The crossbowmen never engaged effectively, positioned behind infantry where they couldn't shoot. The men-at-arms couldn't use their weapons in the crush, couldn't breathe properly with visors down, couldn't move in the mud, couldn't rise when they fell. Recent archaeological work, including geophysical surveys and soil analysis at the traditional battlefield site between Tramacourt and Agincourt Woods, has failed to find significant battlefield evidence. Metal detecting surveys in 2002 and 2007 recovered almost no medieval artifacts. No arrows, no armor fragments, no mass graves at the Calvaire enclosure where tradition placed French burials. Historian Michael Livingston argued in 2019, backed by a 2023 study published in the Journal of Medieval Military History, that the traditional site is too narrow to fit even the smallest estimated English army based on battle formation requirements and experimental archaeology. He proposes the fight occurred west of Agincourt. The exact location remains contested, but the battle itself? Documented by 7 contemporary accounts, 3 from eyewitnesses. The broad facts are solid. The monument stands. The chapel built in 1734 by the Marquis of Tramacourt to mark the mass graves was destroyed in the French Revolution. A 19th century cavalry and a 20th century monolith mark the assumed site now. They killed 6,000 enemy troops and lost fewer than 400. They executed prisoners in cold blood when tactical necessity demanded it. They stacked French nobility in piles. They turned mud into a weapon. They proved that discipline, terrain, and technology could overcome numbers. An entire generation of French military leadership died face down in clay. Knights who diced for ransoms the night before drowned in their own armor. The flower of French chivalry suffocated in the press, and a 28-year-old king walked away having cemented his reputation as one of history's greatest warriors. Disease. The French made every tactical error possible. They massed in the wrong terrain. They placed archers behind infantry. They let every great lord fight for front position. They charged without coordination. They had no unified command. They underestimated English defensive engineering. They ignored weather conditions. They attacked exhausted, disease-ridden men and still lost. Henry V stood in the mud with blood on his armor and a cracked helmet and watched French nobility die by the thousands. He ordered prisoners killed to secure victory. He knighted dying men in the field. He marched to Calais, sailed to England, and became legend. 7 years later, dysentery killed him. The same disease that ravaged his army at Harfleur. The same plague that killed nobles during the siege. The bloody flux that claimed Richard Courtenay and Michael de la Pole and probably thousands more English soldiers never recorded. It waited 7 years. Then it took the king. De Gratia Francorum Rex on one side, and on the other, PC Regnat, PC Imperat. PC meaning per Christum or crucem, through Christ or the cross. They found the burial pit where French nobles lay, though when archaeologist Tim Sutherland excavated the La Gacon area near the Calvaire in 2007, he found no skeletal remains, no grave pits, nothing in the protected enclosure. Either the 1818 excavations removed everything and backfilled with clean soil, or the burials happened somewhere else entirely, or the massacre of prisoners means many bodies simply weren't buried properly. Killed in Henry's order, lost to disease and wounds in captivity, ransomed and released without documentation that survived 600 years. The archival gaps tell their own story. Medieval record-keeping captured only what mattered to the crown financially, the 1/9 of the ransom value owed to the king. Everything else vanishes. Henry chose terrain that neutralized French numbers. He positioned archers to maximize longbow effectiveness. He anchored flanks on woods to prevent encirclement. He used stakes to break cavalry. When French nobles demanded front positions, D'Albret couldn't refuse them without insulting their honor. When the ground turned to bog, nobody delayed the attack. When the vanguard got massacred, the second line charged into the same trap. When prisoners became a threat, Henry killed them without hesitation because survival mattered more than chivalry or profit. An entire generation erased, all in 3 hours on a plowed field in the rain. Every drop of blood spilled at Agincourt, English and French, bought nothing permanent. Just stories, just Shakespeare, just legend.